I was 26 when it happened. The kind of moment that doesn't just sting for a day, it sinks in so deep that years later the memory alone can still make your stomach clench. My name is Haley Anderson. If I had to explain my position in the family in one sentence, it would be this picture: a packed family table where every seat is claimed with confidence, and the youngest one is always the extra place setting that gets moved to the side. That was me. The unplanned addition. The one my parents weren't trying for and never really reorganized their lives around. My brother was the golden child. My sister was the one who captured every spotlight. And I was the quiet girl who got solid grades, taught myself graphic design, stayed out of the way, and hoped that being low maintenance would one day earn me a real spot at the table. It never did. 6 months earlier, Mom's email landed: "Big family dinner, everyone has to come." She talked about how long it had been since the whole extended family was together, extra tables rented for the backyard Aunt Nancy flying in. I read it over and over, thumb frozen on reply. The last time we were all in one place, the jokes about my single status had rolled out like they always did. I went anyway. Guilt has a way of pulling you back, especially when you're the one expected to prove you're worth keeping. That dinner was the turning point. Right in front of the entire extended family, my father put his arm around me and laughed loudly. "This is the mistake we kept. At least it turned out decent." My sister sneered with mockery. The laughter hit like a wave. In that exact second, something inside me shattered for good. If you've ever felt like the family's afterthought, don't go anywhere. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what I did next changed everything forever. 6 months before the family dinner, the email from my mom arrived like clockwork. The subject line was all caps: "Family dinner." "Everyone must come in the body," she wrote about how it had been far too long since the whole extended family gathered in one place, how the backyard would be set up with extra tables and string lights, how even Aunt Nancy was flying in from out of state. She ended with the line that always got me: "We miss you so much, Haley. It wouldn't be the same without you." I read it twice, sitting alone in my small apartment in the Midwest, the glow of the laptop screen, the only light in the room. Miss me. The words felt heavy, almost accusatory, because deep down I knew what they really meant. Come prove you're still part of this family, even if we don't always act like you are. My life at that point was quiet, steady, but lonely in a way I had grown used to. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, taking on remote projects for small businesses and local brands' logos, social media templates, website banners. The income was reliable enough to cover rent, groceries, and the occasional coffee run, but it was solitary work. Most days I spent hours in front of my screen with headphones on, communicating only through emails and Slack messages. I liked the independence, the fact that my success depended on my own effort, but the silence between projects could stretch long, leaving too much room for thoughts I tried not to entertain. Thinking about the email pulled me straight back to childhood, to the ways the family had always been divided without anyone ever saying it out loud. My brother Jacob, 5 years older, had been the one they invested in from the start. Dad poured money into his sports teams, his college tuition, even the startup costs for him to join the small manufacturing company right after graduation. Jacob was the heir, a parent, the one who would keep the family business going, the one whose wedding had been celebrated like a national holiday. Jordan, 2 years older than him, had taken a different path, but still received the spotlight. Mom helped her build her influencer presence, buying cameras, outfits, even paying for professional photo shoots when the sponsorships were slow to come in. Jordan's life was documented, admired, rewarded. And then there was me. I learned graphic design from free online tutorials because no one ever suggested classes or equipment. I paid for my own software subscriptions, my own laptop upgrades, my own mistakes. I was never pushed forward. I just had to figure it out. It wasn't hatred that built up over the years, it was the slow, steady drip of being overlooked. The birthday gifts that were smaller, the conversations that always circled back to Jacob's promotion or Jordan's latest post count. I told myself it didn't matter that I was fine on my own path, but the email cracked something open. Maybe this dinner would be different. Maybe if I showed up, smiled, helped out, they would finally see me as more than the afterthought. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete the email and pretend I never saw it. Another part, the part that still hoped, typed back a simple, "I'll be there." I hit send before I could change my mind. Guilt and hope are powerful things. They pull you back even when every instinct tells you to stay away. The day of the family dinner finally arrived. I left my apartment early, the Midwest summer heat already thick and heavy even before noon. The drive to my parents' house took about 2.5 hours, the highway stretching out under a hazy blue sky, air conditioner blasting to fight the humidity that made everything feel sticky. I kept the radio low, mostly silence, my mind running through the same loop it always did before these gatherings: stay useful, stay quiet, don't give them a reason to point out what's missing. When I pulled into the driveway, the yard was already full. Jacob's black Escalade sat closest to the house, freshly washed and gleaming, Jordan's white SUV parked beside it, with the vanity plate that matched her influencer brand. A half-dozen other cars lined the street, cousins, uncles, aunts, everyone who had been summoned by the same email I had. I parked at the end, grabbed the fruit salad I'd brought from the passenger seat, and walked toward the backyard where the noise was already building. Mom had set up everything perfectly as always. Large tents shaded the long tables, industrial fans hummed to push the hot air around, and the grill was already smoking with burgers and ribs. Kids ran between the legs of adults, chasing each other with water guns, their laughter sharp and carefree. I set the bowl down and immediately started helping, unpacking coolers, arranging chairs, wiping down surfaces that didn't need wiping. It was what I did best, make myself useful, so no one had to ask what I was there for. Aunt Nancy spotted me first. She came over with her usual warm smile, arms open for a quick hug. "Haley, look at you. Still doing that freelance work? Good for you, honey. It must be nice to be your own boss." Her tone was kind, but before I could answer, she turned toward the grill where Jacob was flipping burgers. "Jacob's been telling us all about the new contracts at the company. He's really stepping up, isn't he? Your dad says he'll be running the whole thing soon." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. I nodded, smiled, and moved to refill the ice buckets. Jacob waved from across the yard, casual and confident, the way he always was when he knew everyone was watching. Jordan was nearby, phone in hand, filming a quick story for her followers, her laugh bright and practiced as she greeted relatives. The air smelled of charcoal and sunscreen, voices overlapping in easy conversation. Everyone talking about jobs, kids, vacations, the usual surface chatter that filled these events. I kept moving, carrying trays of sides, refilling drinks, chasing a toddler who wandered too close to the grill. People smiled when I passed, asked the quick questions. "How's work? Still single?" "You look good." The answers were short, polite, and forgotten. The moment I walked away, no one lingered. No one asked what projects I was proud of, what challenges I faced, what I wanted next. I was there doing the things no one else wanted to do, and that was enough for them. Inside, the laughter grew louder, the music from the speakers mixing with stories I had heard 100 times before. I stood at the edge of it all, holding a stack of paper plates, watching the family move around me like I was part of the furniture, useful, familiar, but never essential. The feeling settled in my chest, quiet and familiar. The ache of being close enough to touch everything, yet still somehow outside of it. The dinner started off normally until my father stood up to make a speech. He had been drinking steadily all afternoon, his cheeks flushed, and his movements loose, the way he always got when the beer flowed and the stories grew louder. The tables were crowded with plates of ribs, corn on the cob, and potato salad. Everyone relaxed under the tents as the sun dipped lower. Someone clinked a glass and the chatter quieted as my father climbed onto a low bench, steadying himself with one hand on my shoulder. He pulled me close, his arm heavy around my shoulders, and grinned at the crowd of more than 40 relatives. "Listen up, everyone," he said, voice carrying over the music and the kids' shouts. "I want to say something about this one right here." He squeezed my shoulder, laughing already. "This is the mistake we kept. At least it turned out decent." The words landed like a slap, sharp and public. Jordan, standing a few feet away with her phone half raised, let out a quick, mocking snort that turned into a full sneer, her eyes bright with amusement. Laughter rolled through the backyard, loud, easy rolling from one table to the next. A few cousins shifted uncomfortably, one aunt looked down at her plate, but most joined in the sound building until it felt like it was pressing against my skin. I didn't laugh. I didn't move. I just stood there under his arm while the noise washed over me, every chuckle carving the moment deeper. My father kept talking something about how I'd turned out okay, despite everything, but the words blurred into background static. The only thing clear was the heat rising in my face, the way my hands trembled at my sides, the sudden certainty that I had been waiting for this exact second my whole life without knowing it. When he finally let go and stepped down, still chuckling, I didn't say anything. I didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't even look at Jordan or anyone else. I simply turned, walked through the gap between the tables past the grill, still smoking, past the kids who didn't notice, and straight to my car at the end of the driveway. I got in, started the engine, and drove. The road back to my apartment was quiet, the sky darkening, headlights cutting through the humid night. By the time I pulled into my parking spot, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. I sat in the dark car for a long time, the laughter still echoing in my head, the weight of those words pressing down until I couldn't breathe. Inside my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, feeling the tears come hot and silent. They weren't sobs, just steady, unstoppable streams that soaked my shirt. I let them fall, let the pain burn through every memory of trying to be enough, of hoping they would one day see me as more than a punchline. Around 3 a.m, I opened my laptop. I searched for flights to Boise, Idaho, somewhere far, somewhere new, somewhere no one would think to look for me. I booked the earliest one early enough that I could leave before dawn. I packed a single bag, just the essentials, clothes, laptop, the few things that mattered. I didn't call anyone. I didn't leave a note. When the sky started to lighten, I locked the door behind me and drove to the airport. I didn't look back. A few days after making quick arrangements, I flew straight to Boise, Idaho. The flight was short and quiet, the landscape shifting from flat Midwest fields to the wide open spaces of the West Mountains rising in the distance as we descended. When I stepped off the plane, the air felt different, dry, crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and sagebrush. I rented a car at the airport, drove to a temporary motel, and spent the first few days just breathing, letting the silence settle around me without the weight of anyone else's expectations. After a couple of weeks, I found a small apartment on the north side of town, one bedroom with big windows that looked out over the foothills. It was basic, but it was mine. No family photos on the walls, no echoes of old conversations. I signed the lease, unpacked the few things I had brought, and started the process of changing my name. I went to the Ada County Courthouse, filled out the petition, paid the filing fee, and arranged for the required public notice to run in the local paper for 4 consecutive weeks. The judge scheduled the hearing 6 weeks out, and after a brief appearance where I explained I wanted a fresh start, the change was approved about 3 months later, the total cost coming to a few $100s, including the publication fees. When the final order came through, I held the document in my hands and felt something loosen inside me, a small but real release. With the name change complete, I focused on work. Boise was growing fast with startups in outdoor gear, sustainable tech, and tourism, needing branding help. I reached out to a few local companies, updated my portfolio, and landed my first project, designing a logo and social media assets for a hiking gear brand. The pay was steady, the deadlines reasonable, and the people I worked with were straightforward. No family ties, no hidden judgments. I could breathe while I worked, and that alone felt like progress. In between client calls, I started exploring. Boise sat right on the edge of nature with trails everywhere. I bought a used bike, joined a local group ride on weekends, and discovered paths along the Boise River Greenbelt through sage-covered hills up to ridges with views that stretched for miles. The hiking community was welcoming people of all ages, sharing water bottles and trail tips without asking for my backstory. For the first time in years, I wasn't the quiet one in the corner. I was just someone on the trail moving forward step by step. That's how I met Ethan Thompson. He ran a small company that made custom hiking packs, and they needed a new logo to refresh their brand. We connected through a freelance platform, met over coffee at a downtown spot, and spent the next few weeks exchanging ideas, sketches, color palettes, font options. He was easy to talk to, thoughtful about his business, genuinely interested in the work without any pressure. After the project wrapped, he asked if I'd like to join a group hike that weekend. I said yes. The trail was moderate, a loop through ponderosa pines with a view of the city below. We walked side by side for most of it, talking about nothing heavy, just the trail conditions, favorite spots, the way the light hit the hills at sunset. When we reached the top, he handed me a granola bar from his pack and smiled. "You look like you belong out here," he said. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and took a bite. Over the next few months, the hikes became regular. Coffee turned into dinners, dinners into longer weekends exploring farther trails. Ethan didn't push, didn't ask about my past, just let things unfold naturally. Being with him felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater too long, slow, steady, life-giving. I started sleeping better, laughing more easily, feeling pieces of myself come back that I hadn't realized were gone. Boise wasn't erasing what happened before, it was giving me space to build something new, something that finally felt like mine. 2 years passed peacefully until the first sign appeared. It started with a man in a rental car parked across the street from my apartment. He sat there for 2 days, watching, notebook in hand. I recognized the type immediately, a private investigator. Someone had hired him to find me, and they had succeeded. The sight made my stomach drop, the old fear rushing back like cold water. I kept my blinds closed tighter, avoided the windows, and started using the back entrance. Then the letters began arriving. The first was from my dad, handwritten, shaky, postmarked from the old address. "Haley, your mother and I are getting older. The company is struggling without strong leadership. We need you to come home and discuss your share of the inheritance. Please don't shut us out." The second envelope came a week later, thicker, from their lawyer. It outlined the family trust, the conditional terms, and a clear threat: if I remained unreachable, my portion would be restructured and passed entirely to Jacob. The tone was formal, businesslike, but the intent was unmistakable. They wanted me back, not for reconciliation, but for control. The emotional one came next, from my mom. "We're not the same without you. Your father talks about you every day. The house feels empty. The business is in trouble, and we're scared. Please come home. We love you." The words were meant to pull at old strings, but they only reminded me of the strings that had been cut long ago. I read each one carefully, then deleted the emails, shredded the paper copies, and blocked the return addresses. I didn't respond. Not a word. Jordan showed up a month later. She flew into Boise without warning, stood outside my building with oversized sunglasses and a designer bag, looking exactly like she always did, polished, confident, out of place. When I came down for groceries, she stepped forward. "Haley, we need to talk." Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but I knew better. I walked past her to my car. She followed. "The company is failing. Dad's health isn't great. Jacob can't handle it alone. You have a stake, don't throw it away." I stopped, looked at her. I threw away the part of me that cared about stakes when your laughter rang the loudest that night. She flinched, but only for a second. You're being dramatic. We're family. I got in the car and drove away. She didn't follow. The last letter came from Aunt Nancy. It was long, several pages full of memories and regrets. I know what happened hurt you deeply. I wish I had spoken up more. Your parents are struggling and the family is fracturing. Please consider coming back even just to talk. We all miss you. I read it in the quiet of my apartment, the words blurring through unexpected tears. Then I folded it, placed it in the trash, and took the bag out to the dumpster 3 blocks away. I didn't call. I didn't write. I didn't open any more doors. The past had found me, but I refused to let it back in. Every unopened message, every deleted email, every ignored plea was a brick in the wall I was building stronger, higher, permanent. The quiet returned, but it was different now. It was chosen. I decided not to go back, only to watch from afar. I kept tabs quietly through public records, business filings, and the occasional news mention that popped up in searches I couldn't quite stop myself from running. Boise gave me distance, but the internet made it impossible to disappear completely. I told myself I was just curious, that knowing wouldn't pull me back in, but every update felt like a small cut, reopening an old wound. The first signs of trouble came slowly. Jacob had taken over daily operations after Dad stepped back, and the company, once steady if small, started slipping. Contracts that had been reliable for years began drying up. Clients complained about delays, quality issues, outdated processes. Jacob doubled down on the old ways, refusing to invest in modern equipment or software upgrades, convinced the family name alone would carry them through. Word spread in the industry. One major supplier pulled out entirely, then another. Revenue dropped steadily, quarter after quarter. The debt built faster than anyone expected. Bank loans, lines of credit, equipment financing, most of it backed by personal guarantees Jacob had signed years earlier, thinking he was protecting the family legacy. When payments started missing, the calls came. Notices piled up. The bank issued warnings, then demands. By the time the numbers reached several $100,000, the company had no cushion left. Jacob tried to refinance, but the numbers didn't lie. Creditors circled, and the end became inevitable. The Chapter 7 filing was filed in federal court. Liquidation. Everything the company owned, machinery, inventory, accounts receivable, was sold off to pay what debts could be covered. The doors closed for good. The building that had stood for decades, where Dad had built the business from nothing, went quiet. Employees were let go with severance that barely lasted a month. The name that once meant stability in the local community vanished from business directories. Jacob couldn't escape the fallout. The personal guarantees meant the remaining debt followed him home. He filed his own Chapter 7 petition a few months later, the paperwork listing the house, the cars, the savings, all assets that had to be surrendered or sold. The large family home, the one with the big backyard where the dinner had taken place, was auctioned off. The Escalade, the SUV, the boat gone. He and his family moved into a small rental on the edge of town, a 2-bedroom place with thin walls and no room for the life they had known. My parents downsized too. They sold what they could, kept only the essentials, and retreated to a modest house in a quieter neighborhood. The extended family, once so quick to laugh at the gatherings, began to pull away. Cousins stopped calling. Aunts and uncles made excuses. The shame of the bankruptcy, the public failure, spread like smoke. No one wanted to be associated with the fall. I read the court documents, the auction listings, the brief mentions in local business news. Each one was a reminder of how fragile everything had been, how one person's choices could unravel generations of work. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger anymore either. What I felt was a quiet, steady sadness for the family that had once been whole, for the people who had chosen pride over change, and for the part of me that had once believed I could fix it. But mostly I felt relief. The distance I had fought for was real now. The ties were severed not by anger but by time and consequence. I closed the browser, turned off the laptop, and walked outside into the Boise evening. The air was cool, the mountains dark against the sky. I breathed in deeply, and for the first time in years, the breath felt entirely my own. And in the end, everything concluded like this. My life in Boise grew roots I never thought possible. The small studio I set up became more than a workspace. It became a place where ideas turned into steady income. Projects with local startups kept coming, branding for eco-friendly outdoor companies, website designs for adventure tourism brands, even a full visual identity for a new hiking app gaining traction in the region. The money was consistent now, enough to cover the apartment, the gear for weekend trails, and a little extra to save. I wasn't rich, but I was secure, and that security felt like freedom. Ethan and I grew closer with every hike. We spent Saturdays on the trails around Bogus Basin or the Boise front talking about nothing and everything, laughing at the way the sun caught the river or the way the wind moved through the pines. Our friends, people I had met through group rides and design meetups, became a circle I trusted. They knew me as Haley, the one who showed up on time with good ideas and better coffee, not as the girl with a complicated family story. I didn't need to explain my past to them, and they didn't ask. The quiet evenings with them, sharing stories around a fire pit or a backyard table, filled spaces I hadn't realized were empty. Meanwhile, the family's collapse became complete. The bankruptcy filings were public record. Now the company's assets gone, the debts wiped only after Jacob surrendered nearly everything. My parents lived in a small house on a fixed income, the large home and luxuries of before reduced to memories. Jordan's influencer career slowed to a trickle without the family support that had once propped it up. Sponsorships dried up when the story of the family's failure spread through local circles. Cousins and aunts who once filled the backyard with laughter stopped reaching out. The shame was too heavy, the distance too wide. They were isolated not by force but by the natural consequences of choices made long ago. I never contacted them again. No calls, no messages, no second thoughts. The silence I had chosen became permanent. There were moments late at night when the house was quiet, when a flicker of old guilt would surface, wondering if I could have saved them, if forgiveness might have changed the outcome. But those moments passed quickly. I had forgiven myself for trying so hard to belong somewhere that never made room for me. I had forgiven the part of me that once believed love had to be earned through silence and sacrifice. The real lesson wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was simpler and harder. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who refuse to see you. Family isn't defined by blood or shared history. It's defined by respect, by safety, by the freedom to be yourself without apology. When that respect is absent, staying isn't loyalty, it's self-betrayal. If you've made it this far, thank you. Truly. It means a lot that you stayed to hear the whole story. Stories like this aren't easy to tell, and they're not always easy to hear, but they remind us that we're not alone in the struggle to choose ourselves. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the afterthought in your own life, I'd love to know. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done? How did you find your way back to yourself? Your words might help someone else feel less alone. Thank you again for listening. Take care of yourself out there.